In 1973, two legends stood face to face on The Tonight Show stage. Muhammad Ali extended his hand. Bruce Lee looked at it, then looked away. The studio audience didn't know whether to laugh or gasp. What happened in the next 40 seconds would reveal something about respect, ego, and the weight of being called the greatest. Johnny Carson had a gift for reading a room. After 17 years behind that desk, he understood the rhythms of live television the way a jazz musician understands silence between notes. He knew when to lean in, when to pull back, when to let a moment breathe. And on that particular February evening in 1973, Johnny Carson knew something was wrong the moment Bruce Lee walked onto the stage. The audience erupted in applause. Bruce Lee was at the height of his fame. Enter the Dragon wouldn't premiere until later that year, but anyone who followed martial arts cinema knew his name. He moved across the stage with that distinctive walk, fluid, controlled, impossibly light on his feet. Muhammad Ali was already seated in the guest chair. He'd been talking with Johnny about his upcoming fight, about training, about the usual topics that filled the comfortable space of late-night conversation. Ali was relaxed, leaning back, his massive frame somehow graceful in the chair designed for smaller men. When Bruce approached, Ali stood up. He extended his right hand, that famous hand, with a broad smile on his face. Bruce Lee stopped 3 feet away. He looked at Ali's outstretched hand. Then he looked directly into Ali's eyes. And then he did something no one expected. He bowed. A formal, deliberate bow. The kind that carries centuries of tradition. The kind that means something. Muhammad Ali's hand stayed extended in the air for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 3 seconds. His smile didn't fade, but something shifted in his eyes. The audience didn't know how to respond. A few people laughed nervously. Others stayed silent. Johnny Carson was watching both men carefully. Ali slowly lowered his hand. He didn't bow back. He stood there, 6'3", looking down at Bruce Lee, who stood 5'7". The physical contrast was obvious. But something else was happening in that moment. Something the cameras captured, but the audience didn't yet understand. Bruce Lee straightened from his bow and walked past Ali to take his seat on the couch. He didn't shake Johnny's hand either. He bowed to Carson as well. "Well," Johnny said, his voice carrying that trademark warmth that could smooth over any awkward moment, "we have two of the greatest fighters in the world on the show tonight." Bruce Lee spoke immediately. "I am not a fighter." His voice was calm, clear, but there was something underneath it, something that made the entire studio pay attention. Johnny leaned forward slightly. "You're not a fighter?" "No," Bruce said. "I am a martial artist. There is a difference." Muhammad Ali shifted in his chair. He wasn't smiling anymore. The audience didn't understand what they were witnessing. To them, it looked like playful television banter. Two athletic celebrities trading words on a late-night show. But anyone watching closely could see the tension. Johnny, being Johnny, tried to lighten the moment. "Well, I think we'd all like to know," he said, glancing between his two guests, "who would win in a fight between you two?" The audience laughed. It was the question everyone wanted answered. The question that had been debated in gyms and dojos and bars across America since Bruce Lee first appeared on American television. Bruce Lee didn't laugh. "That question has no meaning," he said. Ali spoke up. "I'll tell you who'd win." His voice had that familiar, playful edge. "The greatest would win, and I'm the greatest." More laughter from the audience. This was the Ali everyone knew, the showman, the poet, the man who could turn any moment into entertainment. But Bruce Lee wasn't playing along. "Greatest at what?" Bruce asked. The laughter died down. Johnny Carson's expression changed. He recognized that shift, that moment when a conversation stopped being entertainment and started being something else. "Greatest boxer in the world," Ali said. There was still confidence in his voice, but something defensive had crept in. "Yes," Bruce Lee said. "You are the greatest boxer." "No question," he paused. "But boxing is not fighting." The studio went very quiet. Muhammad Ali stared at Bruce Lee. "You saying I can't fight?" "I'm saying boxing is a sport with rules," Bruce said. His tone was matter-of-fact, not confrontational. "Fighting has no rules. They are not the same thing." Johnny Carson sat back in his chair. He'd hosted thousands of guests. He'd navigated countless difficult moments. But this was different. This wasn't planned. This wasn't rehearsed. This was two men, both at the peak of their abilities, both called the greatest in their respective worlds, confronting something fundamental about identity and respect. Ali leaned forward. Put me in a street fight with anyone, and I'll knock them out. Maybe, Bruce said, but you would try to box them. You would fight the way you were trained to fight. And if your opponent doesn't follow boxing rules, you would be in trouble. That's the craziest thing I ever heard, Ali said. But there was less conviction in his voice than before. Bruce Lee shifted on the couch. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, but somehow it carried more weight. When you step into a boxing ring, you know exactly what will happen. You know the rules. You know the referee will stop the fight if it goes too far. You know your opponent can only use his fists. You train for that specific situation. That is sport. He paused. Fighting is chaos. Fighting is when someone attacks you and you have no rules to protect you. When there is no referee. When your opponent might use a weapon, might attack your eyes, might try to break your knee. That is when you discover if you truly know how to defend yourself. The audience was completely silent now. Johnny Carson didn't interrupt. He understood that something important was happening, something his viewers needed to hear. Muhammad Ali looked at Bruce Lee for a long moment. "So you think you could beat me?" Ali asked. It wasn't a challenge. It was a genuine question. Bruce Lee shook his head. "I don't think about beating people. I think about understanding reality. And the reality is this. You are the greatest boxer who ever lived. But if someone put you in a situation where boxing didn't apply, you would struggle. Not because you aren't skilled, but because your entire life has been dedicated to one specific skill set." Ali was quiet. Johnny Carson cleared his throat. "Bruce, you've studied many different martial arts, is that right?" "Yes," Bruce said. "And the more I studied, the more I realized that all styles are limited. Every system has rules. Every teacher says, do it this way, not that way. But in a real fight, there are no styles. There is only what works in that specific moment." He looked at Ali. "You are a great champion because you mastered the rules of your sport better than anyone else. I respect that deeply. But I could never shake your hand and pretend we are the same. We are not. You are an athlete. I am trying to understand combat." Muhammad Ali absorbed this. The defensive posture in his body language slowly changed. "So when I put my hand out," Ali said slowly, "you didn't shake it because in my culture, we bow to show respect," Bruce said, "and I have great respect for what you've accomplished. But I cannot pretend that boxing and martial arts are the same thing. To shake your hand as an equal in fighting would be dishonest. You fight under rules. I train to survive without them." The studio remained silent. What happened next surprised everyone. Muhammad Ali stood up. Bruce Lee tensed, just slightly. The audience held its breath. Johnny Carson's hand moved toward his desk, an unconscious gesture, as if preparing to intervene. But Ali wasn't approaching Bruce Lee to confront him. He was standing to bow. Muhammad Ali, the greatest boxer in the world, the man who proclaimed himself the greatest at every opportunity, lowered his head in a formal bow toward Bruce Lee. When he straightened, there was no anger in his face. No wounded pride. "You right," Ali said quietly. "We ain't the same." Bruce Lee stood and bowed again, deeper this time. The two men looked at each other, and then something extraordinary happened. They both smiled. Real smiles. Not the practiced smiles of performers, but the genuine warmth of two people who had just understood each other. Johnny Carson exhaled. You could hear it through the microphone. "Well," Johnny said, "I think that might be the most honest conversation about fighting I've ever witnessed." The audience applauded, but it was different from the usual applause. It was quieter, more thoughtful, like people weren't sure what they'd just seen, but knew it mattered. Bruce Lee sat back down on the couch. Ali returned to his chair. "Let me ask you something," Johnny said to Bruce. "If the goal isn't to prove you're the greatest, what is the goal?" Bruce Lee thought for a moment. "The goal is to understand yourself," he said. "Fighting, real fighting, shows you who you are when everything is stripped away, when there are no rules protecting you, no referee to save you, when it's just you and another person, and one of you will get hurt. In that moment, you discover your true character." He glanced at Ali. Muhammad knows this. Every time he steps in that ring, even with rules, he faces the possibility of real pain, real defeat. That takes courage. That builds character. We both face fear. We just face it in different ways. Ali nodded slowly. You ever been in a real fight? No cameras? No nothing? Yes, Bruce said simply, and I learned that winning is not the most important thing. Surviving is. Understanding is. Growing is. The fight itself is just a teacher. Muhammad Ali leaned back in his chair. Man, you deep. The audience laughed. The tension broke. But something had changed in the atmosphere. The conversation had gone somewhere real. Somewhere most television never went. Johnny Carson, ever the professional, guided the conversation toward lighter topics. He asked Ali about his training regimen. He asked Bruce to demonstrate some martial arts techniques. The show returned to its familiar rhythms. But everyone in that studio, and everyone watching at home, knew they'd witnessed something unusual. After the show ended, after the cameras stopped rolling, something else happened. Something that wasn't broadcast. Something that only a handful of people saw. Muhammad Ali asked Bruce Lee if they could talk privately. They went to one of the dressing rooms backstage. Johnny Carson, curious, followed at a distance. He stood outside the door, not eavesdropping exactly, but close enough to hear fragments of conversation. Ali's voice, you really think I couldn't handle myself in a street fight? Bruce's voice, I think you would do what you were trained to do, and against most people that would be enough. But against someone who trains specifically to break the rules, to attack joints, to use weapons, to fight dirty, you would be at a disadvantage. A long pause. Ali's voice, quieter. That bother you? That people always want to know who would win? It used to. Now I understand that people ask because they don't understand what fighting really is. They think it's about dominance, about proving superiority. But real fighting is about survival, about protecting yourself and the people you love. The question, who would win, misses the point entirely. Another pause. Ali's voice, you scared when you fight? Bruce's voice, always. Fear is the first thing you feel. The question is what you do with it. Ali's voice, almost whispering, yeah, I know about that. Johnny Carson walked away from the door. He'd heard enough. He understood in that moment why Bruce Lee had refused to shake Ali's hand. It wasn't disrespect. It was the opposite. It was refusing to participate in a lie, refusing to pretend that their worlds were the same when they weren't. Bruce Lee could have shaken Ali's hand. It would have been easy. It would have made the audience comfortable. It would have been good television. But Bruce Lee wasn't interested in good television. He was interested in truth. And the truth was that he and Muhammad Ali represented fundamentally different approaches to combat. Ali had mastered the art of controlled violence within a framework of rules. Bruce Lee was trying to understand violence itself. Raw, unfiltered, chaotic. To shake hands as equals in fighting would have been dishonest, and Bruce Lee valued honesty more than comfort. The conversation that night rippled through the martial arts community for years. Some people thought Bruce Lee had been disrespectful. Others thought he'd been arrogant. But those who understood, really understood, recognized what he'd done. He'd refused to let the world simplify something complex. He'd refused to reduce two different disciplines into a single category just because it made for better entertainment. Muhammad Ali, to his credit, understood. In interviews years later, he would occasionally reference that night. He never spoke badly about Bruce Lee. In fact, he spoke about him with a kind of reverence. That little man taught me something, Ali said in an interview in 1978. He taught me that being the greatest at one thing doesn't make you the greatest at everything. And he taught me that respect sometimes means telling the truth, even when the truth makes people uncomfortable. Bruce Lee died 5 months after that Tonight Show appearance. He was 32 years old. His death shocked the world. The theories and speculation would continue for decades. But that night, that February night in 1973, he was alive and vibrant and absolutely certain of his principles. Johnny Carson would later say it was one of the most memorable moments in all his years hosting The Tonight Show. Not because of conflict, not because of drama, but because two extraordinary people had a real conversation about something that mattered. The footage of that appearance exists in NBC's archives. You can watch it if you know where to look. You can see the moment Bruce Lee refuses to shake Ali's hand. You can see the confusion on faces in the audience. You can see Johnny Carson navigate the tension with skill and grace. But what you can't see in the footage is what happened after. The private conversation, the mutual respect that grew from honest confrontation. You can't see Muhammad Ali, the greatest boxer who ever lived, sitting alone in his dressing room after the show, thinking about fear and rules and what it means to truly fight. You can't see Bruce Lee, the martial arts legend, writing in his journal late that night about the responsibility that comes with being called the greatest. What the cameras captured was just the surface, the visible part of something deeper. Two men, two different paths to mastery, two different understandings of combat, and one moment of absolute honesty on live television. The world wanted them to shake hands, wanted them to smile and pretend they were the same, wanted the comfortable lie. Bruce Lee gave them uncomfortable truth instead, and in refusing to shake Muhammad Ali's hand, he showed more respect than any handshake could have conveyed. Because real respect isn't about making people comfortable. Real respect is about honoring the truth of who they are and what they represent. Even when that truth is complicated, even when it creates tension, especially then. The studio audience that night didn't fully understand what they were witnessing. Most people watching at home didn't either. It would take years, decades even, for the significance of that moment to become clear. But Johnny Carson understood. You could see it in his face, in the way he let the conversation unfold without forcing it toward easy conclusions, in the way he created space for two legends to be honest with each other in front of millions of people. That was Johnny's real genius. Not the jokes, not the timing, but the ability to recognize when something real was happening and to protect it, to let it breathe. And on that February night in 1973, something very real happened. Two men stood face to face. One refused to shake the other's hand. And in that refusal, in that moment of cultural and philosophical friction, they found understanding, not agreement. Understanding is different from agreement. They didn't walk away thinking the same things. Bruce Lee still believed that sport fighting and real fighting were fundamentally different. Muhammad Ali still believed he could handle himself against anyone, but they walked away respecting each other's truth. And that respect, forged in discomfort, tested by honesty, meant more than any handshake ever could. The Tonight Show studio emptied that night like it always did. The audience filed out, talking excitedly about what they'd seen. The crew broke down the set, the cameras were covered, the lights dimmed. By midnight, the studio was dark and silent. But what happened there would echo for years, in dojos and boxing gyms, in conversations between fighters and martial artists, in late-night debates about the nature of combat and the meaning of respect, and in the memories of those who were there, who saw two legends confront each other with truth instead of pretense, who saw Bruce Lee refuse to shake Muhammad Ali's hand, and who understood finally that sometimes the deepest respect looks like refusal. Sometimes honoring someone means refusing to lie to them. Sometimes the greatest kindness is uncomfortable truth. Bruce Lee knew this. Muhammad Ali learned it that night, and Johnny Carson gave them the space to teach it to America. One bow, one moment, one truth. That's what television used to be capable of showing us. Not always, not often, but sometimes on nights when real people had real conversations about real things, on nights when legends were brave enough to be honest, on nights when someone refused to shake a hand because a bow meant more. If you remember watching The Tonight Show during those years, we'd love to hear your memories. Did you ever see a moment on television that stayed with you because it felt real? Tell us in the comments what made classic television special to you.